Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm your co-host, Daniel Torres. Hello, Christina. How are you?
Hi, Daniel. I'm doing well. Great to be here again.
Likewise. Interesting times. India was recently named the most populated country in the world by some sources. So it's one of these countries we'll have to keep an eye on, no, Christina?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the fastest growing economies as well, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. So today we're bringing a guest that's right up that alleyway and will be able to answer many of the questions that we have about this mega economy. You've probably heard about the famous Tata company, which is very well known for its steel, its cars, chemicals, but actually it's also active in the consumer goods space with its consumer subsidiary. And today we welcome to the show Sunil D'Souza, which is no other than the CEO of the Tata Consumer Company, which he joined after a long tenure at international companies like Pepsi or Whirlpool. Sorry, I went directly into it.
So I'm Sunil D'Souza. I'm the Managing Director and CEO of Tata Consumer Products. Tata Consumer Products is the FMCG arm of the Tata Group, which is one of the largest and oldest business houses in India.
And what does it mean exactly to be the CEO of Tata Consumer?
Daniel, Tata Consumer as a company was formed officially on February 9th of 2020. Till then, the Tata Group did have consumer businesses, but they were housed in different companies. So the whole idea was, if Tata is the biggest brand name in the country, it's the most trusted name in the country, and therefore you've got every reason to be successful in the consumer goods, and in India you call it the FMCG, fast moving consumer goods. Then what stops us from getting there? Till then, if you had stacked up the list of companies which were the top ones in the FMCG space, the Tata name didn't figure. So Tata Consumer Products was created to make that difference, to create Tata's stature and size in the FMCG space. So it started off by putting two businesses together. It was there was the company called Tata Global Beverages, which was primarily tea and coffee. And we pulled in the consumer business from Tata Chemicals, which was Tata Salt, and a small brand called Tata Sampann, which was pantry. Over the last 3 years, we've put multiple businesses together from across the group. We've expanded the portfolio. And let me say, we are now into a multitude of categories, both in India and globally. In India, we have Tata Tea, which is the second largest brand in India. We have Tata Coffee, which is our entry into the coffee space, and we are growing very fast there. And we have Tata Salt, which is a 38% share of salt in India. So it is the single largest salt. So that's the core categories that we have. The second big pillar that we have is a brand called Tata Sampann, which is pantry staples. So we're into pulses, spices, cooking mixes, dry fruits. We've just entered vermicelli, multiple products into the pantry space. That would be trending about a 30% growth consistently. The third pillar that we have is a ready-to-drink platform, as we call it. We used to have a joint venture with PepsiCo. It was a 50-50 JV, which we bought back in the year 2020. That is basically, I would say, three pieces. One is India's number one mineral water brand called Himalayan, a fast-growing packaged drinking water brand called Tata Copper Plus, which is regular water plus as much copper as you would have leaching into water if it is stored overnight in a copper vessel. So builds immunity, etc. And then affordable I would say, refreshing nutrition called Tata Gluco Plus. We've just entered an energy drink segment, just entered the sports drink segment, all in an affordable 10 rupees cup format. The next pillar that we have is what we call breakfast, mini meals, and snacking. And we have 2 brands operating out there. The big brand is a brand called Tata Soulful, which is into breakfast cereals. We've entered something called masala oats. In India, sweet oats didn't take off as much, so the savory version does very well. So that has been doing very well. And then we launched muesli, we've launched granola. After having knocked off all the breakfast pieces, now we are slowly pivoting into a snacking brand. So we've launched something called the Choco Sticks, which is the kid snack. It's basically a center-filled snack, if I may. And the last piece is where we're dabbling around with protein. So we're into the alternate meat. We have just launched a protein supplement. So these are the base categories in India. Internationally, we have Tetley Tea, which is the number 2 tea brand in the world. And that plays across close to about 40 countries. And then we have 8 o'clock coffee in the US. So we've number 3, number 4 tea brand in the UK, depending on when you measure the market shares. We're the number 1 brand in Canada. And we're the coffee brand in the US is the number 4 roast and ground brand in the US. Apart from that, we also have a joint venture with Starbucks, a 50-50 joint venture under Tata Starbucks. And then as associate companies, we've got 2 plantations, and we've got a subsidiary called Tata Coffee, where we own 58%, which is plantations and a B2B extractions business, which we are in the process of now consolidating.
Oh my God, this is like huge, right? And it's only the Tata Consumer part of the whole group. Like, out of curiosity, could you tell us a little bit more? How expansive is really Tata's footprint, like in India and globally?
Oh, Tata is one of the biggest business houses in India and globally. It's probably India's most recognized and most valuable brand name. 1868 is when they started. So if you look at the businesses, we've got, if I'm not mistaken, 20 plus big listed companies. It's India's number one, number 2 steel business, Tata Steel. It's India's one of biggest automobile producers, Tata Motors. India and probably globally very, very strong Tata Consultancy Services, which is information systems and software. We've got probably India's one of biggest chemical companies, Tata Chemicals. India's number 1 hotel company, Indian Hotels, which operates under the Taj brand name. So yeah, we've got, it's often called the salt to software conglomerate. We're into multiple businesses. We are into electronics retailing. We have India's first super app. A whole range of businesses. The structure is the one which makes it unique. So there is a holding company called Tata Sons, which is the holding company for all these groups. And all these businesses operate more or less, I would say, in Tata Consumer, for example, the Tata Group owns about 34% stake and therefore controlling, but the balance is listed. But Tata Sons itself is owned by something called Tata Trust, which is a group of trusts, different trusts, which ultimately have to give back probably a significant amount of money back to charity. So it's if you look at the perfect mix of driving businesses, creating value, and that value is given back to society.
Very interesting. Is that mandate to give back to society? Is that like a legal thing, or is it more like an ethos type of decision?
So it's a bit of both, Daniel. The charter of the trusts which own Tata Sons is to give the money back to charity. So the founder had two sons. When the sons willed away most of their assets to these trusts, and then of course there are other trusts as well in the group. All of them have a very, very specific mandate to give back to society, and it's very, very specific areas as well. So there are things like education, medical, health, infrastructure, public infrastructure, all those different types of things to which we contribute.
Awesome. Very cool. And then going back into Tata Consumer, which is the part of the business that you're managing, you mentioned that you have your India portfolio, which is your home base, and then you have your international business. What does the footprint look like? Like, what is the split of the business between India and international? And maybe you can tell us a bit of like where the business is going along these lines as well.
So Daniel, when we started off as a company, like I said, in February of 2020, we had also, before that, Tata Global Beverages itself was roughly 50-50, 50% India, 50% global. But when we put in the salt business also together, it was probably almost 3 even legs, or maybe 40 was maybe 35, 40 was India beverages, and about 30 was international, and 30 was about international India foods. Today, actually, the India business is growing far faster than international. And I would say we are right now about 3/4, 1/4. So about 75% of my business comes from India. About 25% comes from international. But in terms of numbers itself, we started, and we were about 1.1 billion when we started off in 2020. And if you take this year, we are going to be close to about 1.7, $1.8 billion. We've grown compounded at the rate, top line has grown at about 13%. EBITDA also has grown as about 13%. But as we've cleaned up all the legacy structures and streamlined operations and monetized a lot of unused assets within the corporation, my group net profit has grown at 40%. So as a CAGR of 40%. So as a result, market cap has moved from roughly, I would say, 3 billion to we are now starting to trend north of $10 billion.
These are very impressive numbers. But what I would like to do now, Sunil, is go back a little bit on you and your journey, because before Tata, you worked in really big corporations, right? But they were predominantly international ones, American. And now you are back into a native company. And I'm really wondering, how has this shift been? Have you noticed differences? Were there any challenges? What do you say is generally the main thing that made this a shift?
So Christine, let me put it this way. When I made the move from multinationals to an Indian company, there is probably no other Indian company I would move to other than the Tatas. And the reason for that is because the professionalism and the ethics and the values of the Tata Group, you could be in any Western multinational. The Tata Code of Conduct, the Tata Group ethics, etc. I mean, you could have seen the same pieces anywhere in the world, right? So there's been absolutely no change from that perspective. But what has changed, and for the better, is I keep saying this. I get the best of both worlds in this role. I get the professionalism and ethics of Western multinationals, and I get the decision making and the agility of the Indian entrepreneur. Technically, let me put it this way: in big Western multinational, you have an idea, either organic products, organic categories, or you want to enter new markets, or you want to do an M&A. You have to jump loops and hoops through multiple layers of bureaucracy before you get a decision, right? Whereas here, it's as long as you've got logic on your side, you convince the board and the chairman, it's a matter of a very quick discussion and you get rolling. So our ability to move and decide our own destiny is completely in our own hands.
Yeah, which is also a task that's not for everybody, right? Some people are more comfortable with a high level of structure and high level of, process as well. I mean, it's also a challenge in itself to be able to do that transition. But obviously, you're still there, so I assume it's gone well.
Yeah. So Daniel, actually, you know what? Because of this ability to write our own script and decide our own destiny, and what I say, build the premier FMCG company in India for the Tata Group, the people that we've attracted are all on board because of this. We've got some of the best talent in the industry, and we've pulled them on in the past 3 years as we've gone along. And the big thing that motivates everyone is exactly this piece, saying we can decide where we want to do, but we've got the freedom, but we've also got the responsibility to deliver.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, that's best of both worlds. It's a delicate balance, but if you can nail it, like if you can have like best practice, rigor plus entrepreneurship, that's where really if you're growing, for sure you need to be there. By the way, sorry, Christina, go ahead.
I'm just thinking of the notion of the freedom within framework that we used to talk also in P&G about a lot. And it feels like this is what you guys are nailing there in Tata, being able to have this level of freedom and being able to move fast, feel like you're contributing and making those decisions, while at the same time having the right framework to operate within so that you adhere to that level of professionalism and the ethics that you mentioned. So it sounds actually like a really good place to attract talent.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, we aligned the strategy with the board. After that, bringing it to life, it's you got to make your own decisions. Along the way, if there are some changes in the environment, some opportunities which you saw today, which you didn't see, again, you go back, quickly align, make the required tweaks in your approach and keep moving. And the way we are structured is by category. So international, India beverages, India foods. So all of them are P&L owners, right? So, and they can move the items within, like they can move different line items on the P&L to make sure they're ultimately delivering value.
Sunil, very curious from your point of view to know, and I think that our audience will also enjoy that. If you can give us a bit of a perspective of what the India FMCG retail market is looking like today, because obviously it's very different to the European and North American market, which we're more used to speaking about here. So.
Oh, absolutely. India is a completely different ball game to most, I would say, developing and definitely developed markets. It's a fast growing market. In line with GDP growth, that depends 6 to 7%, depends on whose estimates you believe, whose forecast you believe. 6 to 7% GDP growth means there is growth percolating down and therefore growth in CPGs. Lot of it is penetration driven growth. Lot of it is from unorganized to organized. But just to give you some numbers on the Indian market, right? 1.4 billion people. So depends. Number one, number two, population wise, growing, probably the fastest growing large economy today. But look at this. In 2022, the Indian middle class was 28.5%, and it is projected to be 50% in 2030.
Wow.
Now, even if I assume population constants, that 300 million entering the middle class, which is what? The population of the US, population of EU. So in the next 8 years, you'll get that much coming into the consuming class in India. Their total spending power is expected to be $10 trillion, right? Which is almost equal to where the US middle class is in today in terms of spending. Yeah, US middle class is smaller, but in absolute terms, the total spends are about the same. The big difference in India versus anyone else is the fragmented trade and the unorganized categories, right? There is modern trade is relatively a smaller piece of the puzzle here. It's about, I would say, depending on the category, between 10 to 15%. E-commerce is growing and growing fast, but still it's just about 8 to 10%, depending on which category. So 75 to 80% of the business is done through 8 million outlets, right? I mean, and that is the big challenge. So the large CPG companies which have been successful in India have figured out distribution. So that's the key to the Indian CPG, FMCG business. So I would say that the three big pieces in any FMCG business is distribution, branding, and innovation. So in India, it's distribution number one, branding number two, and innovation number three. I would say in most developed markets, branding would be number one, distribution is given. Yeah, because with modern trade, you can get distribution quite quickly. So, and then your job would be branding and innovation. But here, without distribution, rest of the stuff doesn't work. There is no, in the Western world, even when you say general trade or traditional trade, people are used to dealing with large business houses, a la a broker and a logistics provider, or you do DSD, direct store delivery, right? In India, to cater to those 8 million outlets, it's distributors. Over the years, small distributors have been developed across the length and breadth of the company. So the FMCG distributors go through that. Now, the Indian market is a lot of people come in thinking it's a cheap market. People want cheap goods, but I would term it differently. It's value for money. So the Indian consumer is not willing to compromise on quality, but he or she wants it at the lowest possible price. Again, there is a dichotomy. It's probably one of the most fast-growing countries in the world for a Mercedes and a BMW. But at the same time, most consumer products are also sold in sachets. You have a shampoo sachet, you have a tea sachet, you have a coffee sachet. So it's what coffee is a 2 rupees sachet. Yeah, 2 rupees is, just to put it in perspective, it's what 85 rupees is $1.
Yeah.
So you can do the math, right?
It's like a few cents.
Correct. Less than a few cents.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and therefore to be successful in India, you can't adapt a global business model. You can't do a cut paste and expect to be successful. So, you've got to tweak your business models. India, for example, in the mobile space, it's cheapest data across the world, right? I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's 2 cents a minute, versus if you look at the US, etc., would be close to double digits, right? But the Indian mobile companies still make money because they've completely rejigged the business model. They outsource their entire infrastructure, and therefore they work on a completely variable basis. Whether it is food, beverage, any consumer service, you've got to tweak your business model to succeed into India. You've got to adapt. The other piece is, and again, I'm talking more from a Tata consumer perspective. Right now, we are primarily in the food and beverage space. You've got to adapt your food and beverage. Just because you've got a global product doesn't mean it's going to succeed in India. Coke and Pepsi, when they entered back in India in the early 90s, they saw close to 1 billion people and says, wow, what a market. They quickly figured out affordability is an issue. And therefore, then they said it's only 100 million people which we're targeting. Food and beverage products have to adapt to Indian taste. So there are global companies which came in for breakfast, for snacks, etc. And I would say at best, they've hit about $150 million turnovers. But if you adapt the products to Indian taste, for example, PepsiCo in India came in only with potato chips, which is Lay's. But potato as a habit takes a long time to build. And therefore, it was a slow, painful growth till they stumbled upon, or they created this Indian product called Kurkure, which is a snack made out of flour, which is spicy. And that took off. Potatoes did grow. And I mean, they're a sizable portion of their business comes out of potatoes, but also other extruded local savory snacks simply grew very fast to help them reach scale very quickly. So you've got to understand the landscape in distribution. You've got to understand the landscape in consumer. You've got to understand that there are different layers in the market, adapt to them, and adapt your business models and your products to be successful in India.
It sounds like a very complicated landscape coming from, the big multinationals. What I'm really interested to ask you, Sunil, here is going back to the distribution piece and the route to market. Would you ensure execution, or would that come second? Would you rely on your distributors, or would you also have to deploy your own sales force while distributors take care of logistics, for example?
No. So the way it operates, Christine, is we've got the supervisory sales force across the country, and each, for example, the structure is a regional manager who has an area manager reporting to him, and depending on this thing, it's a area executive under the person. The area executive would probably be handling about, I would say, about 8 to 10 salespeople working under a distributor. So it is almost like an outsourcing model, if I may call it. The salesmen are on the roles of the distributor. The distributor carries inventory. The distributor gives credit. The distributor handles logistics and executes. But that execution is under the supervision of a company person standing there. And digital is the big leverage. The Salesforce application and the distributor management system are all company provided for. And therefore, data is real-time analyzed by the companies.
That's very impressive. And you mentioned now digital, and before at some point you mentioned that Tata is like the first super app. So I understand that digital does play overall a big part, and we know that it's reshaping the way we do business globally overall. So I'm really wondering, apart from using digital as a sales tool, let's say, to oversee the execution and your route to market, how else is digital now changing the way business is done in consumer sector in India?
So digital effectively, if you look at it, Christine, it does three things for us and for every business in India. A, it decreases cost or improves efficiency or helps manage complexity. Yeah. And I would say digital, I would broadly look at it in, there are four different pieces for digital for us, at least in my mind. One is digital media. The second piece is digitization, as in using data. The third piece is e-commerce, which is online digital selling, if I may. And now, of course, on the horizon, the big buzzword of AI, right? Now, as a perspective, digital plays a huge role in India because for many Indians, smartphones and are the way to access the internet. India has got the cheapest data. So whether it is accessing information, looking up things, even buying stuff, it is on this thing. So that's the digital media piece, right? So internet, streaming, etc. On digitization, as I mentioned, so for example, at Tata Consumer, from end to end, we've got the salesman carrying a Salesforce app, which is linked to the distributor management system, which is linked to my SAP. So real time, I have visibility on actual outlet by outlet selling as to what's going on. We are completely cloud-based with SAP HANA. We run the Blue Yonder IBP. And in today's world, efficiency comes in with Teams and Zoom, right? I mean, people can be in different parts of the country. So I've got offices and I've got a significant portion of my team sitting in Bangalore, a significant portion of my team sitting in North in Delhi, and a portion of my team sitting in Calcutta. But I mean, you call for a meeting in 10 minutes, you can get a meeting, you can get people in, you can get decisions going, right? Then I'll talk about e-commerce, right? Now, I did talk about 8 million outlets in India, but e-commerce is actually taking off in India. And what that does is helps companies overcome the on-ground distribution challenge. So you can do very targeted products and you can surmount distribution hurdles on e-commerce. So just to give you a perspective, before the pandemic, only about 2% of my sales used to come from online sales. Today, we are close to touching about 10%. To give you a perspective, if I remember the numbers right, in China, 40% of appliances are sold online. And India, that number, if I'm not mistaken, is approaching 20%. And these are large appliances, refrigerators, washers, right? Grocery, China is about, I think, 20. We are approaching about 10. So that's the huge opportunity. Plus, I launch very many brands which are targeted to the profile who shops online. So we've got cold press oils or we've got alternate meat. All that, I don't want to get into 8 million outlets and start figuring out complexity. I can go very targeted online. And the other piece in India which has happened is this famous thing, I don't know if you heard of it, called the India Stack, right? So every Indian has a unique identity. They've built something called Unified Payments Interface, which is the money goes straight from your bank account digitally to someone else. So you can even buy vegetables from the roadside vendor and pay them through the UPI piece. The Indian government has pushed a long way on digital, and therefore payment systems are very, very simple. Lastly, of course, artificial intelligence. We are also learning with the rest of the world on how to leverage it, whether it is personalized creatives, sales analytics, sharpshooting, etc. So digital is probably disrupting the Indian market quicker than, if not as fast as anywhere else in the world.
Interesting. And I think that it will probably be an exponential curve as well, like digital, e-commerce, and also like this rising middle class. I think that if we have this conversation, not even like 5 years from now, probably 2 years from now, the numbers will probably look different, no, already?
Absolutely. No, and Daniel, just as a perspective, the Indian government is now dabbling in something called ONDC, which is the Open Network Digital Commerce. So they want to make sure e-commerce capabilities are available to anyone and everyone who wants to do business. So even as a local retailer, you can get onto ONDC, list your products. You can select whom you want to do your deliveries. You can select how you want to get your payments. So everyone is online enabled.
Well, Christina, we'll have to go to India to check that out. I have a visit pending to see friends. So
yes, I actually think this is very impressive, and it's a lot of information that I am not aware of. I would say that in my feed and the media that I get on my phone, right, it's not things that I would come across very easily. But it feels like a really big shift happening in India right now, and then the term towards digital. So definitely a huge opportunity for the people who get it right and who are there at the let's say not very early beginning, but this is now when it's moving towards the greater part of the population, and people get the education and the understanding of how digital works, and it enables their lives in a certain way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, the advantage of coming from behind is you can leapfrog across technologies and get to the front of the line, right? I think that is what is happening in India. So we didn't have landlines, smartphones came in, we moved out there. We were still struggling with payment networks, etc. Digital came along, and all of a sudden everything gets enabled. Distribution has been a challenge. ONDC, Amazon, Flipkart come along, and all of a sudden e-commerce gets enabled. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And you were mentioning before, Sunil, how lots of products are sold in sachets, which basically means that there's more waste generated. We recently had the chief sustainability officer of Colgate-Palmolive on the show, for example, and obviously they're a big plastic user because they have like a lot of toothpaste tubes and so on. What actions are you taking as the CEO of Tata Consumer around ESG in general, but maybe more specifically waste management?
So overall, Daniel, sustainability is a huge priority for the Tata Group. Just about last year, we embarked on something called Project Aalingana. Aalingana actually means it's a Sanskrit word for embrace. Yeah. So all the large Tata companies have already put out publicly their targets on sustainability going into the future, and this is not everything will happen in 2050. So there are very specific commitments with very clear milestones and targets to achieve. For Tata Consumer itself, our ESG, our sustainability framework is split into 4 pieces. It's for better nutrition, it's for better sourcing, it's for a better planet and better communities. And now to just give you some details, better nutrition means we've got targets on responsible marketing, product stewardship, access to nutrition, and consumer connect. On better sourcing is our raw materials that we use. For example, globally, we are rainforest certified products. In India, there is this organization called Trust Tea, which is again certified tea. The substantial portion of our products are from there. We are committed to sustainable agriculture as well. On Better Planet, we've got targets of net zero. We've got targets of water. We've got targets for biodiversity, and we've got targets for circular economy. For circular economy, right now, we are members of the India Plastics Pact, the UK Plastics Pact, the Australia Plastics Pact. And in India, there is something called extended producer responsibility, which means you've got to directly or indirectly recycle as much plastic that you put into the system. And we are 100% compliant there. So we actually recycle. We go through certified providers and recycle as much plastic as we put out through our products. And lastly, when I say better communities, we've got targets on community engagement and employee well-being. For example, today we engage about 1.2, 1.3 million people in the community. The target is to get up to 1.5 million. And when I said this is not targets out there, everything will happen at some point. So we've committed to being water neutral by 2030. We said all our factories will be zero waste to landfill by 2030. We said all our packaging will be either recyclable, compostable, or reusable by 2030. We will be net zero by 2040. We will have 50% diversity in our workforce by 2030. So
Wow.
We put down clear targets, and on a yearly basis, we review them.
It feels like we're really taking the lead into shaping things up towards helping the planet and the environment. But what I really love is that what I'm hearing is not just do less harm, but also the do more good, and how do they bring something valuable back to the people and to the communities, which I think is wonderful. And I love that I see more and more companies going that way. So it's not just about doing that hygiene check that we need to do on following the regulations and make sure we don't do too much harm to the environment, but rather, how can I help improve this planet that I'm operating in? And I love this. Going on a completely different topic a little bit, Sunil, I was wondering, I saw that when you took over the reins of Tata Consumer, it was around the beginning of the pandemic, right? And on that part, could you tell our listeners a little bit, how did you handle this? It was new role, big responsibilities, big organization, and suddenly working from home, going on quarantines. How was that experience for you? And what would you say the best approach would be?
So Christine, yes, I did that. I would credit a huge part of that to 2 big factors. A, the fantastic support of the board and the chairman. Number 2 is, like I said, we were as a company just formed in February of 2020, and I took over on 4th of April. So, and people had this big vision of creating India's premier FMCG company. So the energy levels despite all the challenges that came on working from home, were very, very high. And I would say we the motto of never waste a crisis, right? So we use this COVID downtime to restructure, whether it is restructuring in terms of the organization, setting up a completely new distribution system, setting up the logistics backend, digital implementation. So yeah, we knew we couldn't do as much on the ground, but the background, lot of work and lot of cleanup, lot of pieces we put into together very quickly. I would say the critical piece is you've got to realize that as a leader, ultimately at a point in time in your life, you're never doing anything. You're just selling the vision to a few set of capable people. And then you've got to enable them in their day jobs to get to where you want to go. I think as long as you do that effectively, you're always in a good place.
I love that. I keep the quote that as a leader, you never do really anything. You're selling the vision to a set of capable people and enable them to deliver the code, right? Love this.
Yeah. I wrote it down as well, I have to say. And Sunil, like in this leadership journey that you've taken since you started your career until now, I'm sure you've learned a lot of things. If you were to go back to your younger self at the beginning of your career, knowing what you know now, what is the one piece of advice you would give yourself?
So Daniel, I would say probably 3 pieces of advice, right? So number one is, in the beginning of my career, I quit or I moved jobs because I didn't like the politics that were happening, right? Till at a point in time, I realized there will be politics everywhere. You've got to just figure out the intensity and how to deal with it. Because if there is organization, there are people. Now, it's at different levels in different organizations, but there'll be some things under the surface always. You've got to figure out how to handle it. So that's number one. Number two, I would say it's all about people ultimately. Like I said, as you go more senior, then you become a leader of people, a leader of teams, a leader of the enterprise, and then it's all about getting people charged up and getting them excited about what they're doing and keep driving towards your targets. Lastly is a personal stuff. I've always believed, and more so I believe in it now, as long as you do what you love, success will follow, right? So I've always looked at, will I love doing this, whether it was different roles or different companies, will I love doing it? As long as I love doing it, success follows.
This was Sunil D'Souza, CEO of Tata Consumer. What an interesting one, no, Christina? I think we know more about India and are ready to assault it whenever we can.
Absolutely, Daniel. The conversation for sure did not disappoint. And it was absolutely up to my expectations on how we can learn more about India and specifically also the consumer goods part. I think that one of the things that Sunil mentioned, which had to do with the route to market actually in India and how important it is to get the ground distribution first. That was one of the most interesting parts. So he mentioned that in India, distribution is actually number one, while brand comes second and then comes innovation. While what we're used to in the westernized markets, it's mostly brand coming first and then building your distribution. So that's for sure one big thing that companies that want to succeed in India will have to tackle.
Yeah. Also in line with that, the fact that modern trade is around 10%, e-commerce is around 10%, and then 80% is through 8 million small outlets. I mean, I think that's something fascinating about the India market, which you can see very obviously when you visit India.
Absolutely. The fragmented trade is huge, and that's exactly where the challenge lies. How can you work with different distributors to put in place the right sales force that will ensure that we get the right distribution for the right assortment, but also ensure the right level of execution in the market? So that's super challenging. What I also love, though, was how he tackled the perception that in India it's all about cheap products, while in fact it's more about the value for money and how you can provide the right level of quality, as well as provide the right level of adaptation when it comes especially to food, so that you can be the right fit for the Indian market.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just so much to learn about it. I also like the fact that digital, I think that sometimes we have the conception in the Western world, probably right assumption that digital favors more big businesses than smaller businesses. While in India, they're really empowering the small businesses through digital, which I find fascinating and probably a good lesson to learn from there as well.
Yes, for sure. First of all, as we mentioned, grand distribution is number one. When you cannot tackle that because you do not have the scale to manage these 8 million outlets, what can you do? And here's where digital comes to offer a solution. So as Sunil mentioned, it's all about building the brand first online, where it's way more easily addressed when it comes to distribution. And then you can get into the thinking of, okay, now how do I get this to those 8 million doors that need to be selling it after I've established it first? And let's not forget, 10% in such a huge population is an incredibly big number.
That's true. That's true, as well as like the growing middle class, which I think goes a bit in parallel with that. So I mentioned that 300 million people will be entering the middle class in 8 years, which is, as you said, the size of one of the biggest countries of the world, right?
Absolutely. And on top of that, when you have the infrastructure that you need for this division to grow, for example, the cost of mobile internet, that's something that we don't really bring into conversations when we talk about the future of digital. We're mostly focused on habits, but the enablers are hugely important. And when you see that there is a government that's also supporting digitization across, then it's only an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it will be interesting one day to speak with Sri from the CPG guys, who's from India originally, but has been in the US for a long time and is very passionate about digital, about how he sees that. And I think that finally also, I think one thing interesting was the Project Aalingana that he mentioned about social responsibility, where they have, seems like very ambitious targets for a date that's pretty close to now, which is 2030, right?
It is. I love that it also means embrace. I like the branding of it. And what I thought was quite interesting is that we do see also in India the same approach that we saw when we're having those conversations with other big brands from here in Europe or the US, right? So it's not just about doing less harm to the environment, but rather about doing good in the community, good to the planet.
Yeah.
So I love that. I would say, Daniel, I would love to have a follow-up podcast, let's say in like a couple of years from now, to really see how the numbers have changed, how the structure has changed, and how digital has exploded in India.
Yeah, no, we'll have to work to bring more guests from India, definitely, which, by the way, we will. So thanks for listening in today. Remember, if you haven't yet, which you probably haven't, to leave us a review. It will be very quick, but you'll do us a massive favor. And that way, more people like you will be lucky enough to listen to us week after week. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week.